There's a reason why I started making videos on the internet, specifically pertaining to video games. I have been gaming since I could remember. I have this little picture of me when I was 4 years old in a Santa hat, just playing my Super. Well, it wasn't my Super Nintendo; it was my brother's Super Nintendo, technically. Super Nintendo in bed, and there has never been a time that I can remember where I have never played a video game. It goes that far back. And so, of course, with a history like that, making a top 10 list of my favorite games is going to be difficult. But did the best I could, and right here and right now in this current headspace, this list is as true as it's ever going to be. So let's do this. Number 10. My most graphic memory of Secret of Mana is the Thanatos boss fight, because I remember seeing my brother play the game and getting to that one point and scaring the crap out of me when I was a little kid. And it was that music, and it was that, very grim facade of Thanatos as he's attacking the three heroes, and, his skeleton hands erupting from the ground and trying to attack. It was, that's how... That's my most vivid memory of Secret of Mana. But the memory I like the most is the memory of me trying to play with my brother. It was one of the very few games that he got where I could play with him. And it was so rare, it still is rare, to find an RPG where more than one person could play at a time. And it didn't have to be a solo affair. I mean, it even had a multi-tap. It even had 3 people could play at a time. Playing that game and listening to that epic music and, fighting Rabbites and getting weapon orbs, it just fills me. It makes my inner child happy. Number 9. I got to this game way later than I should have. Like I said, my first real console that I ever had was a PlayStation. And that should have been, immediately after I got my PlayStation, I should have gotten Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I didn't play it until way, way later, but I am so sorry that I didn't, because I would have loved this game as a kid. Castlevania today is still kind of aping from the design of this first game. It had great RPG elements, it had great magic, it had great boss fights. Oh my god, those boss fights. It's actually kind of funny when you're playing the game and you're trying to figure out what exactly you're fighting. Because the bosses that you fight can be so massive and hard to convey with words that it's, like I said, you can't exactly describe them, really. Of course, there is that ironic guilty pleasure of the horrible, horrible dialogue throughout that game. Well, it's not so much horrible dialogue as it is very poorly translated dialogue and directionless voice acting. It was just like, they got some local designers behind the game, and they just said, okay, say this line. Now say this line. Say this line. Okay, we're done. I mean, that was the extent of the voice directing behind that game.
You broke free of my spell. I like that.
Demon, death is too good for you.
Come here, little boy, and show me what you got.
If only I had gotten to this game sooner, I don't know if my life would have changed all that much, but at least I would have had eternal gamer cred. Number 8. Truth be known, I kind of like the RPG elements in the original Mass Effect more than in Mass Effect 2, but I don't think, in the entire Mass Effect series, I think 2 hit a better balance of shooting tactics, RPG elements, and class powers. It achieved a good balance with that, and I don't think they were told a necessarily better story than the original Mass Effect, but I felt it populated itself with more memorable characters. I've never really seen the appeal of Garrus. I liked Garrus, but I don't see what the fan reaction to Garrus is really roots from. However, I was more of a Morden fan myself. But even beyond Morden, I loved Thane, and I even loved Grunts, because he felt... It was like you were witnessing the growth of a character and how he came to be, rather than seeing a character just be affected by the environment around him. I mean, hell, I even kind of like Jacob in a weird way, but that's only because in my mind's eye, I'm always picturing Jacob being played by Tracy Morgan. Like, you know, Jacob has no personality. Well, he does when you make believe that Jacob's being played by Tracy Morgan. It's an insulting personality, but hey, it makes the game a whole lot funnier. It had been a long time where a game allowed you to import your previous save to continue the story that you began. It had been quite a while. I believe there was another PC game did it before him, but the name of that title escapes me. And I remember when I played the game for the first time, I remember feeling like, wow, that is really ambitious of the series to do. And I think that kind of affected that idea of starting in one game, then continuing in another directly, and continuing again in Mass Effect 3, but, you know, we don't talk about Mass Effect 3. But for the time being, before Mass Effect 3 happened, going from 1 to 2 was like an experience that gamers hadn't had in a long time. And I remember thinking, like, if only more games had the utter balls and the gumption to have a more than one game story arc, where you began in one game and you finished in several games down the line. And Mass Effect delivered that. And it'll always be one of my favorite games because of it. Number 7. Truth be told, I probably spent more time with its sequels and Guitar Hero than I had with Rock Band 3, and I made like 1 or 2 features in the prequels, in the previous games more than in Rock Band 3, but Rock Band 3 is like the culmination of the entire music rhythm genre. And I was incredibly sad to see it kind of fall by the wayside and reach its peak and just kind of peter off as it has. Because I could still pick up my plastic guitar and still have fun, and I still feel challenged by new songs and by trying to best my own score. I mean, if you measured my favorite games by how many hours I've logged in playing the game, then probably the Rock Band series would take number 1. It would just be... I spent so many goddamn hours just... I think the only video game that I've ever spent more time in is probably World of Warcraft. And I haven't played World of Warcraft since 2008. I remember when I first played Guitar Hero 2 because we got the game from my brother who knows how to play guitar, and he didn't think much of it at the time, but then he realized how fun it was, and then he got me to play it, and then it became like who could get better faster between us two, and I wound up blowing him out of the water. If I do say so myself, but it became sort of like a bragging rights. In fact, it was me trying to post some of my best scores on the original Rock Band that got me to do online reviews, basically. So I have basically Rock Band to thank for giving me the opportunity to be where I am today. If that's not a reason why that should be on my favorites list, I don't know what is. Number 6.
I chose the impossible. I chose rapture.
I've never really been a big fan of first-person shooters. I mean, more so now than it was back then, when there wasn't like an actual health bar and you had to find health and you had to find armor. I liked it better than when you just crouch behind cover and just wait for your bar to regenerate. But in came BioShock and reminded me that a first-person shooter could be more than just taking cover and firing. Even though I got to BioShock late to the game because I had a PS3 at the time, I didn't have a Xbox 360, so I only got to play BioShock after it came to PS3, like a year after it was released. So I was, but I was lucky in that I didn't have the ending spoiled for me, even though I got to the game so late. And that moment where you realize that everything you've done in the game was... nothing you did was without consent from Atlas or Fontaine. And you helplessly beat up Andrew Ryan with his own golf club. You beat up a helpless Andrew Ryan, rather. And he screams out, obey. It's one of those moments that defines a generation. I remember playing BioShock on the hardest difficulty without the Vita Chambers and realizing that the best tactic to go for was using telekinesis. It was the fastest way to clear out enemies, and you never ran out of ammo. And I liked how the game allowed you to experiment in that sort of way. And of course, taking down the big daddies and dealing with little sisters. It was everything about that game just worked in such a way, and that's sort of why I was so disappointed with BioShock 2. It didn't offer really anything new, and the story was not nearly as good. It was just so many missed opportunities in BioShock 2. And I'm hoping for the world for BioShock Infinite, but hearing all the troubles that they're having, I'm not, I'm reserving my expectations because I feel like I'm going to be disappointed, but here's hoping it redeems BioShock 2. Number 5. If there was ever a game on my list that was sort of like a guilty pleasure, this would be it, because as a game it doesn't really work. It's sort of like a point-and-click adventure game that takes out kind of all the challenge of it. It was a game that the likes of which I'd never played before, and hadn't played again until Heavy Rain came out. But for a game, its atmosphere and its presentation was such that I had never... I really honestly believe that Indigo Prophecy has a beauty to it that I don't think has yet been surpassed. Not graphics-wise, but like I said, by presentation and by atmosphere. By that rule of thumb, it has a certain cold, gray beauty that I just completely latch onto. The story, I'll admit the story doesn't really make much sense by the time you get to the end. The controls were a bit off, and some segments were really slow. But this is the reason why this is a personal favorites list. I can't really defend that game on a practical level, but on a personal level, it's just a game that's really close and endears itself to me. I can't really explain it other than I can play that game over and over again. That's just how... It's just that weird programming of me. Number 4. One of the quick outs for horror game design is to make sure that the player doesn't have fluid and responsive controls, because if you can limit what a character and player can do to escape danger, it creates tension, so says design theory. But in comes the suffering that says, you know what? You're going to handle yourself fine. You're going to be able to run where you want to, you're going to be able to turn corners how you want to, and you're going to be able to fight back. You would think that would make a game tension-free, but the suffering manages to heap on the tension and heap on the scares by instilling atmosphere. If you can tell by now, I'm a big fan of atmosphere. I like a game to have a feel to it. There's something intangible that affects gameplay, that affects the story. I like it when a game has a sense of identity outside of its direct visuals. And that is The Suffering. It's a game that has a great setup, haunted prison, already there. It has memorable monsters. I mean, they weren't just undead, they weren't just demons, they were physical manifestations of execution and how people have died on the island. And the game also had the great presence of mind to ask really tough questions about, again, like going back to what I said about the Shawshank Redemption, about, you know, imprisonment, whether or not prisons really do anything. And it was that stark look at people doing evil things that I will always remember. If there was going to be one or two things about The Suffering I will always remember, it will always be its atmosphere, and I will remember its unrelenting look into the abyss, dark abyss of humanity. And I'll also remember the Gonzo gun. Number 3. If you ask me what game do I tie with my childhood the most, it would probably be Final Fantasy IV. My brother never let me play it because he said that it was a rare game, and finding a working copy of that SNES title was rare at the time. And he didn't want my little, you know, he didn't want his little brother's hands breaking the game. So he never let me play it. And I think that kind of colored my perceptions about the game. Like, it was so flawless that I couldn't play it. Only the purist could ever hope to even look at the game, let alone play it. But I remember watching my brother play it, and I remember realizing that games could tell a story. A game didn't have to be like my Sesame Street game, where basically I try to find numbers on a menu or shit like that. A game didn't have to be like Mario jumping over pits and landing fireballs on piranha plants. It could be more than that. I mean, not to take away anything from those games, but a game has a chance to tell a story in a way that no other medium has. And Final Fantasy IV was the game that made me realize that. It was the first game that I felt like it's the game that in my mind's eye, I typify as like the epic adventure. It's the tale of a dark knight who's trying to redeem his soul for the evil that he has done in the name of his king. And it's a story about finding his identity and betrayal, and there's all these grandiose subjects inside an SNES cartridge. The music is probably the one singular aspect of the game that I will always remember. Like the first time where as Cecil and Kane walk out of the castle, and you hear the main theme like da, 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 da. I will always remember that. I will always remember that scene. I mean, that was like, if there was like a timeline of my personal gaming history, that would probably be the biggest marker right at the early. That would be like when man first crawled out of the primordial soup. That would be that moment right there. Number 2. When I first got my PlayStation, the first game I ever got was Chrono Cross. And my god, what a game to start out on. I remember wanting to get it first because it was the sequel to Chrono Trigger, well, spiritual successor, or however you want to call it, to Chrono Trigger. And I remember really, really liking Chrono Trigger, so I wanted to see how the story would continue. And at the time I played it, when I was about 10 or 11, It was my 11th birthday, I believe, or 12th. You know, around that age, I couldn't quite understand what was the connection between Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross. But I remember liking the game enough because, not one, the music. The music is the best in all of gaming, period. I don't care what other games you bring up as being better than Chrono Cross. It isn't. No gaming soundtrack is better than Chrono Cross's. End of discussion. If there's one thing about this game that, besides the music, that really endears me to it, it was the fact that it was a story that revolved around the notion of fate and the notion of decisions you made versus decisions you didn't make. And the way the game dealt with it, and the fact that there had an entire area of the game where it was described as a singular moment where of a timeline that completely collapsed. A future that could have been, but never will be. Because the people in Chrono Trigger went back in time and stopped that particular events from happening. It was such a grandiose thought. It was such a grandiose theme that never occurred to me. And it made me think about, like, how would my life have changed had I gone one way versus the other? It was this nature of alternate dimensions and alternate timelines and alternate everything, basically. I think I like the combat more than pretty much anyone who I've ever talked to playing the game. They never really had too many nice things to say about the combat, but I don't know. I kind of like the idea of being able to attack multiple times in a turn and deciding how much energy you would reserve for a stronger attack versus an entire element to cast. And I also, speaking of the elements, I really love the spells that you can cast and the abilities that you can garner. I know it's just, this game is one of the most epic adventures that I've ever played, and it's only by the slimmest hair that it missed my number one, but there could only be one choice for the top spot. Number 1. True story here. I got a bunch of notes here about the games on my list, and when I wrote for Metal Gear Solid, talk about the game's atmosphere, its cinematic quality, its bending of the fourth wall, just nearly everything about the game. Try to keep it short. Good luck, right? I mean, what is there to say about Metal Gear Solid that hasn't already been said by everyone? I didn't come to the game as early as I would have liked. It took my friend John bringing over his copy of Metal Gear Solid for me to want to play it. And I just remember being so entranced by the music and its atmosphere and its cinematic quality. I never seen a game that presented itself in the way that Metal Gear Solid did. And luckily, and that's part of the reason why I wished I had Castlevania Symphony of the Night play. I wish I played that earlier, so that way when I first played Metal Gear Solid, I could have heard Psycho Mantis talk about me playing Castlevania. Oh. I mean, besides like the really out there story about clones and soldiers and genome soldiers, it was a game that almost got me to cry one time. And of course, that one moment was Sniper Wolf. It was the death of Sniper Wolf, rather. And I mean, playing the game nowadays, that scene is actually a little hokey to me, but I can't really call it out on its hokiness. I just keep remembering having killed her that one time so many years ago. So.
Okay, hero. Set me free.
Goodbye.
If I had to choose one game, to be buried in a time capsule for future generations to witness and possibly play if they still have the old artifactual games still lying around, it would be Metal Gear Solid. We are nearing our final list right now, and it's going to be a doozy. Top 10 anime list. It's gonna be hard. Wow. But that's for next week. Till then.